You know what happens to somebody who doesn't know God's righteousness? And maybe that's you today. You don't know God's righteousness, and you're like, well, what does that even mean to know God's righteousness? If somebody doesn't know God's righteousness, they tend to create their own righteousness. They say things like, you know what? I got my own belief system. You've heard people say that before. They've kind of put God in this, their own frame of mind, their own box, their own belief system. A lot of people do that in our world. Maybe you do that. Maybe you've come to your own conclusions about who God is and what God desires and what God wants out of you. Some people say, well, I'm a pretty good person, and if I'm a good person, then I'm going to go to heaven. I get to go to heaven. I get God's approval. Or if I stop drinking, then God's going to say, oh, good job. If I give up that habit, that really bad habit, then I'm going to gain God's approval. Or they might have this kind of philosophy where it says, I'll gain salvation by service. If I just do a lot of good stuff, if I give to people, if I give to charity, if I do all these good things, then God's going to really like me and I'll get approval from God. It's this thinking that says, my good service outweighs all the bad stuff that I've done in my life. And some of you think, well, that's stupid. That's crazy thinking. Is it? That's kind of how we live our lives. Because when we let somebody down, when we fail somebody, we want to prove to them and we'll make it up to them. You ever say that? I'm going to make it up to you. I'm going to prove to you that I'm really a good person. And so we'll do things to make ourselves look better. And we take that same kind of philosophy into our relationship with God. And we say, God, if I just do enough good stuff, it's going to outweigh all the bad stuff in my life. Right? A lot of people have that philosophy. Here's the thing. God doesn't grade on a curve. You know when you take a test and you're like, at least for me, I'm like, man, if I could just get a 90%, that's an A, right? I love that. I just get a 90, 91, 92, I get an A. You know what? If I get a B, it's in the 80s, but I strive for perfection. I strive for the 100%, but I'm happy with the 90%, right? Because it's an A. And sometimes we take that into our relationship with God. God requires 100%. 100%. Perfection. That's what God, if you want God's approval in your life, you want to go to heaven, you got to have 100%. You've got to do it all right. You got to follow all the rules exactly right. You got to be perfect in order to get to heaven. Not 90%. Not 92%. You can't just get a passing grade to get to heaven. God requires 100%. You got to be 100% good, 100% righteous. Here's the deal with God's rules and regulations. Okay, you look at all these rules. You look at how God wants you to do this, how He wants you to live your life. And God, if I follow all of these, listen, those rules and those regulations, all of those standards, all of those precepts, they lead us to Christ. They lead us. They point to Christ. In the New International, or in the NASB, what does that stand for? The New American Standard Bible, verse number 4, it says it this way. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. Isn't that cool? That means that He is the fulfillment of the law. He is the completion of the law. Nobody can achieve perfection. There's no one. Even Paul says that he followed the law to a T, but in God's eyes, he was not perfect. Yes, he followed the laws. He thought that he followed all of them to a T with perfection, but in God's eyes, he was not perfect. Listen, when God sees a Christian, a true follower of Christ, God the Father sees in you Jesus. He, Jesus, is the righteousness of God. He looks at us as believers and he sees the righteousness of Jesus. When Jesus comes into a person's life, something incredible happens. Yes, you're not good enough. You haven't reached that perfection. But when you accept Jesus Christ into your life, you become perfect in God's eyes. It's hard for us to understand, but that's the reality. That's called God's grace.